Welcome everybody. Thanks so much for coming through. I just want to get a quick idea, a show of hands. Was anybody there last year for this similar presentation? I just want to see if there's any repetition. Okay, not really, great. Then I can just go through it. So my name is Pascal Schmitz and I am from AAA Entertainment. We are a sales and distribution company here in South Africa. And we provide content for any buyers locally and globally, but we also do co-productions and development to get content that the market is not providing yet to the buyers. So I'm going to try and run through, first part, the general landscape, traditionally how it works, what is distribution, bit of a 101. Then I'm going to move to the new landscape, which is obviously the streamers, and how kind of look at it. And then lastly to what kind of content is in demand and how to get that content packaged and out to distribution. Okay, so first of all, the traditional model. So this is just to get a bit of an idea how it works overall. We've experienced this sort of on a lot of levels, but a lot of people don't see the difference between the studio system and everything else down the value chain. So I've kind of done a pyramid here to demonstrate the levels at which this operates and who interacts with who traditionally. So this is obviously Hollywood, right? And they do set the standard in many ways. But a lot of times people will come to us with projects and say, this is like Fast and Furious, you know, which did really well. And we have the same storyline, etc. Not understanding the dynamics of getting productions or concepts greenlit and off the ground at different levels of budget and of distribution. So the studios are obviously the kingpins in the system. Traditionally, there are 6 studios. 2 of them collapsed, you probably know, into one, which is Fox and Disney. And what people don't often know is that the studios are distribution companies. Okay, it sounds when you say studio, you know, back in the 30s they had lots and they were producing, but really their primary function, if you look at what most of the people that are employed by the studios do, it has to do with distribution. They don't really produce themselves, they have production companies that do that. They don't really finance themselves often, they have financiers that do that. And they are the only ones that have global deals and can drop a film on 3,000 screens and a few hundred broadcasters without having to negotiate a deal. They have these deals in place, and if you, for example, in South Africa represent all of Warner Brothers films, then when Warner Brothers release a film, whether you like the film or not, whether you think it will do well in your market or not, you will release the film. And that obviously is a different proposition to what the others have to do, who have to often negotiate on a film-by-film, series-by-series basis with whoever they're going into a region with. The studios just drop it and it goes out. Okay, so just to understand, so that's the studios. Now the studios will predominantly work with companies that have an output deal with them. And an output deal means they've done a deal and 4 times a year the studio will take films from that particular production company. Right? And it's already preset what those deal terms are, and once they have a picture they think the studios will like, they present it, it gets greenlit, and it goes into production with distribution in place. And obviously once you have a deal with a studio, you can get the financing to do it, etc. It sort of goes down the chain. So the output deal companies, they work with major producers that come to them with projects, and it goes up the value chain. Those major producers either have projects themselves or they're working with producers or production companies that have catalog, which just means they have a plethora of projects behind them already. And so it goes down the value chain, as you can see. Production companies 1 to 3, completed titles. And on the left, you can see from the studios, you get the mini majors, which is companies like Lionsgate that have some deals in place in countries, but also have to do deals still on some titles in some territories. And then bankable sales agents, which I'll come to a bit later. These are sales agents that once they sign your film and they do projections, you can actually bank those projections. You can actually get financing against what they've projected will be the revenue of their film. Their credibility is such that a bank will actually believe their projection. So if they say this film will make a minimum of $5 million and a maximum of whatever, you can actually go to the bank will give you $5 million against those minimums. So those are bankable. And then you get sales agents, which is where we also fit in. And sales agents are like estate agents in a way. They are there to sell your film, take a commission on the sale, and help find buyers and have existing relationship with distributors and buyers. And then it goes down to aggregators. Aggregators are companies that take volume of content. They're not really going to look at your title individually and go and sell it. They are just aggregating content and supplying it to platforms in a sort of passive way, I guess. And then there's self-distribution and first-time filmmakers. That's the beginning of the value chain. Okay, so then what has changed, obviously, is the streamers entered. And in many ways, the streamers have changed the landscape entirely, but also they work at all those levels of the value chain, right? They operate like a studio. If you think of Netflix and Amazon, they do work like studios. But they also have the outlet to the audience themselves. And they also work as production companies. And they also basically do a lot of the downstream stuff themselves, development, picking up projects, depending on the territory that they're in, because they're not just operating in a singular territory. They are global, and depends on where they are, they will actually do a lot of the functions that some of these other categories would have done previously. So the model is changing, and it's changing because of the streamers. That is the primary reason that the model is changing. And so a lot of the things that used to happen don't happen anymore, and a lot of things that used to happen, now the streamers act like the studios. And you might notice that a lot of the studios are also doing content for the streamers. So you'll see stuff on Apple TV, but then you'll see it's done by Warner Brothers or it's done by Sony. So there's this whole crisscrossing between the streamers now and the studios in the traditional model. So who are distributors? Distributors traditionally are companies that distribute in a particular region. Okay, so typically, if Warner Brothers releases a film and it's coming to South Africa, then a distributor locally will do the distribution of that film. They are usually experts in that territory. In other words, they know how to get a film onto cinema or how to get a film onto television, what the prices are, how to do the deals, etc. It is something that a distributor is good at in a particular region, and some distributors can be multi-regional, but in the traditional model, you would go from region to region and do deals with different distributors. And their role would be to put your film out in that specific region and then take their cut and give you the net revenue that remains. So that will be theatrical, DVD or home video, which is obviously pretty much dead, although it still exists in some form in the USA and some countries. And then all the VODs, right? The VODs. SVOD, subscription, TVOD, transaction, AVOD, advertising, and NVOD is ships and aeroplanes and other ancillary sort of rights. So the distributors will operate in their territory and do those rights, and they may pay something called a minimum guarantee, an MG. Now, an MG can be used for financing, and an MG is when they say, we guarantee a minimum for our territory of X dollars. So we will pay you X dollars for our territory, and we'll give you a contract that says that, and once we get the film and we deliver it, then we will pay out that minimum guarantee. And you can take, again, an MG to a bank or a financing institution, and you can finance that piece of paper because you've been guaranteed a minimum, right? So it doesn't mean that's all you'll ever make, but the distributor is confident that your film will make a minimum of X in their territory. Distributors don't usually deal with producers directly. They deal with sales agents and other distributors or studios, and the reason for that is simply time and capacity, right? Because there's a lot of sort of jargon and language and negotiations that happen between distributors and sales agents and other distributors that require a baseline knowledge of how the contracts work, You know, what are the reporting functions, the accounting, etc. And they don't want to start from scratch every time, basically, explaining that to a producer. Now, as producers become more experienced, they actually start to understand these things through interacting with the sales agent, and they can start engaging. But on your first film, a distributor would be shy to engage directly with you as a producer because they know you're going to ask a lot of questions, right? And they're going to have to do like a 101. So part of our job as a sales agent is often just training and education in a way. It's explaining these things to filmmakers, right? And we have to take the time to do that and sit down and sort of unpack what these things mean, where distributors are really moving through deals at pace. And they need to do a deal, you discuss the basic terms of the deal, sign, move on. They can't really do that, especially if you go to a market. A typical distributor has X amount of meetings they can do at a MIP, and they want to get as much content through the system. You know, deal flow, they call it, in that time. And so they don't have the time to explain everything, really. So sales agents, kind of self-explanatory, I guess, but we sell to distributors, aggregators, and platforms. Sales agents don't usually pay upfront, but act like an estate agent, although some sales agents can finance as well, the more sizable ones definitely. And they also charge for the cost of selling the film. So whatever costs are involved in selling the film and processing the sale. And this is an area you have to scrutinize when you're doing a deal with a sales agent. You can't have that be an unlimited cost. So there's something called a cap on costs. So if you're doing a deal with a sales agent, make sure that there is a cap on all cost expenditures, because if it's open, it's happened a lot that they come back and say, well, we spent all the money the movie made in selling the movie. Don't be surprised. It has happened many times. So you need to have a cap on those costs and understand what the sort of industry norm is for costs to sell a film. And usually now with the stream, it's a singular cost because it's a singular delivery, and there's a cost to that delivery, and then it goes out worldwide. So we also repackage films for international markets, understanding how to sell a film in specific territories, specific languages, specific cultures, and repackaging for those markets, which would be poster, trailer, you know, the story around it, the press, etc. Sales agents also manage festival strategy and PR, and often festivals will reach out to us and ask what is coming up, what is the lineup, what do we, you know, have that's exciting that we've signed recently. Whereas, I'm not sure if you're aware, but if you send a film to a film festival generically, let's say Sundance, and they get 17,000 submissions annually for their festival, do you think the program director watches 17,000 films? No, not possible, right? You just do the maths. How many hours is that? So who watches your film? An intern, a volunteer at the festival. That is the first point of contact. So a volunteer, film student, excited, signed up at Sundance, is watching your movie and doing the first assessment. And if they think your movie is not great, it goes in the red pile, and it never gets up the ranks to the people that make the decisions to program the festival. So oftentimes a sales agent can help in that we have direct contact to the programmers, and we have direct contact to the people that actually choose the content, and we can highlight certain films because we also know what they're looking for and what fits. They do trust us to not recommend a film that would never show at their festival. But the general filtration system is obviously like just a volume, processing volume, I guess, you know. We also manage to manage legal contracts and accounting reports for sales, obviously, to track all the sales that have been done, where they've been done, the currencies they've been done in, and the costs involved. And we give letters of interest as sales agents that can often get a project started, just to say there is interest, we would take this film on, and oftentimes projects can kick off with that on its own. This is the list of bankable sales agents. This presentation is also up on the internet. I'll have an address, a URL later, but if you want to look at that and write it down, otherwise there will be a version of it you can download. But these are what are called bankable sales agents. These sales agents, if they give you projections, and obviously you got to get them to sign up to your film first, then you could sell that. So obviously projections being even before your film is made, And often it comes down to the caliber of director and, who the cast attached. Bigger sales agents do require often big cast attached, etc. Once they agree and say this is a great project and they sign up, they can project before the film's been made, and you can go and finance against those projections. And then these are the platforms, obviously, where nowadays a lot of or most of the content is ending up, either directly or after it has done a run in other places, but the platforms are really where most of the content now is reaching audiences. And again, there we have subscription platforms. That means they have customers that and they have a constant income stream, and they act a lot like pay television. SVOD is often, you can say, like pay TV. TVOD is transactional video on demand. So that's really what's replaced DVD. So what used to be a DVD sale, order online, is now TVOD. AVOD is advertiser funded. So the obvious one is YouTube, but it's very hard to make money with films on YouTube, as you might have figured out by now. But there are platforms like Pluto and Tubi, which are actually growing exponentially. In fact, in the USA, that is the new frontier, is the AVOD platforms. And these are platforms where people don't sign up with their credit cards, they don't subscribe, they can use them for free, but there's advertising. And obviously, they're bigger in regions with bigger advertising spend, which the USA is generally always going to be the biggest one. But a lot of our content actually does well on these platforms in the USA, because there's people looking for variety. It's a huge audience. The free, obviously, audience, the AVOD audience, is larger than the subscription-based audience. And so you can also market to them. It's easier to get content onto AVOD platforms because they work on revenue share. They're not paying up front. You get a share of the advertising revenue, so the barrier to entry is much lower, and often you can get there directly as a producer. You don't even need a sales agent to get onto some of these platforms. You can go directly. And then NVOD, like I say, is airlines, hotels, ships, and they're often very picky. To be honest, airlines are very peculiar about the content they want, because they don't want things that upset passengers. There's odd things that they look for that you wouldn't think of, but they don't want passengers to feel uncomfortable, or explicit sex scenes, etc., are often not allowed. So they're very particular in the type of content they choose, but they're usually buying from sales agents and distributors. So most of the big platforms, like Apple TV, etc., will only buy from distributors and sales agents again, unless it's a revenue share deal. But if you want them to pay up front, they usually, again, work with distributors and sales companies, because they have done a contract with that company, and they can't do a contract with every single piece of content. So they're trying to basically bring in multiple content through one provider. And you'll find, like a Netflix, will have in every country a handful of providers, and all the content flows through them. Right, so deliverables, very important part of distribution that we often struggle with, is understanding deliverables while you're in production, or at least in post-production. And what are deliverables? So just having a movie and saying, here you go, go and sell it and provide it, doesn't really work, especially with the streamers nowadays. So you have to have a textless version of your film and have the subtitles and other texts separate, because they obviously subtitle them for every region. So you need a clean file, separate subtitles. Like for Netflix, we deliver something called an IMF file, which is a very huge file that can be updated in particular frames. And you have to have somebody who's an accredited IMF provider, for example, provide that. Music cue sheets, music license materials, it's a big deal, especially doing global deals now. Is the music cleared for every country? You have to consider this up front. Are you buying the rights just for your region? You've restricted distribution to your region. So when you're doing a music deal, you've got to make it as open as possible. Worldwide rights, in perpetuity, ideally, if you can. Otherwise, sometimes the license deal is 7 years, but the music deal is 5. and after 5 years the music runs out and it gets flagged and you have to pull the film off the platform because the music isn't licensed anymore. You know, things to think of when you're in production, right? Because especially music, you actually consider that very early on, you know, at minimum by post-production, but usually earlier than that even. So subtitle files, closed caption files, which is more than subtitles, it's subtitles describing all the audio. M&E, music and effects, having the music and the effects on a separate track as the dialogue. Sounds simple enough, unless you've basically recorded dialogue and used the sound effects of the same microphone that recorded the dialogue. Now those things are together in one track. And to separate them and have the sound effect there, you have to use Foley, which is not a cost you want to find out about once you've finished your film and want to distribute. Because you're going to have to go back and do that, and those costs can be quite dramatic, really, if all of your sound is mixed up. E&O insurance, errors and omissions, that's an insurance mostly the USA needs. And that's an insurance that basically the insurer checks the film and makes sure that you haven't used any brand in a way that's bad. You know, so the guy wearing the Nike shirt that's running after schoolgirls, Nike's not going to like that, and they're going to come after you. So there's an insurance for that, and the insurer checks that your film wouldn't get you into trouble, basically. And if somebody does come and sue, the insurer would pay out. So E&O insurance is something that if you want to get into the US market, more often than not, it is required by them. Artwork, obviously, but also considering having a photographer on set, getting artwork separate from just what you were doing anyway in production, and then legals and contracts. So, you know, there is a waiver basically you sign that you take the responsibility for all releases contractually, which means all your actors have to have signed releases on their image. Everything you've used has to be signed off so that the sales agent or the platform isn't liable for lawsuits by people that pop up and say, wait a minute, I wrote that script. Or, hey, I never signed that you can use my image for the trailer. Things like that. They're all considered part of deliverables. And then chain of title, clear understanding of where the rights started, and in the chain of title, meaning where those rights moved to. The book was optioned. The publisher signed an agreement with you. A writer wrote a script. Another writer came in and changed the dialogue. Each one of those has to be recorded and has to be an agreement for them that they agreed that you could use that version, right? And one missing agreement, and you've got a lawsuit, basically. So legal, generally, it's 3% of budget in South Africa. So you've got to be looking at spending on a larger film for a global distribution about 250,000 Rand in legal fees in total. And often people don't budget that. So that is the new landscape now, the streamers, right? And the streamers, and this is just an example to show you with Netflix, have covered the globe. So think about this. One movie, one deal, one delivery, the film's available everywhere where it's read. Okay? So when we started our business in 2014, we had to go to each one of those regions and do a deal. And that means doing a deal with a Latin American distributor and it's all in Spanish or in Portuguese, and you've got to look at their rights and their legalities and then do a deal and deliver to their format, and then you move on and you do a deal in Scandinavia and you've got to look at their contractualities and their specifics. And so a lot of the deals were not possible just because the resources required and the money we'd have to spend would be more than the value of the deal, basically. Okay? And a lot of small countries that we see pop up when we release films globally would never have even been considered. But they do actually make up a fraction of the deals you do with a Netflix or an Amazon or any kind of global streamer. So that's really what's changed. And it has pros and cons, obviously. But the obvious pro is that you can get your film to a worldwide audience. You know, you got to see this as a gateway to the audience. And once you've reached the world audience, you will find out where there is interest in your story. Where is the audience for the films you're making, for the kind of stories you want to tell? You don't know that yet. And in the past, you would not have known that, because Mexico probably wouldn't buy the film because it's not specific for their region. Now you go out worldwide, and surprise, surprise, people in Brazil are loving on your film. And now you know, okay, I have an audience in Brazil. Let me consider this on my next film. Let me bring in a Brazilian character. Let me, exploit that market that I found now. So that's the biggest advantage, I think. And obviously, you have a much bigger audience. And because of that, also the budgets are better, because they're not buying for specific small regions. They're buying globally. So that's what the current landscape is with the streamers. Netflix in the lead with 238 million subscribers worldwide, right? That's a very large number of people. And remember, they have multiple profiles, multiple people using the account. Although they're cracking down on that, this could potentially represent 500 million or 750 million people even. So it is a massive worldwide audience you would have never reached before. And then Amazon Prime in second, Disney Plus catching up. Tencent and EQ, those next two are Chinese platforms, and they're obviously relying on their domestic market, but you can see it's very sizable. But they also just buy very hyper-local content, so it's very hard to break into those markets per se. This is an example of a South African release in March of 2020. As COVID hit, lockdown started, they were going to go out on cinema that March that year, had everything prepped, and then the lockdown came. And so they ended up doing a global Netflix deal because there was no other way to get the film out now. And the combination of that film going exclusively to Netflix and also lockdown, a lot more people watch television, led to this hit. And look at the number of countries that this South African film went into the top 10 of, seriously single, That is a very, very massive success in terms of audience uptake, right? And this would have just not been possible before the days of the streamers. And here you can see, this, by the way, is from a report that Netflix released that's on the internet. So if you just look up Netflix report, I've just taken a highlight out of there, the kind of investments they're making. Which is incredible for an American company. Remember, Netflix still is a California company. And no other company from the USA in this industry has come and invested this kind of money on the continent, right? So this is the kind of expenditure that's happening because they can take this content from here, and it's working all over the world as well. It's working locally and it's working globally. And Blood and Water is one of those success titles. And this is just an overview of what they've done so far that has really, hit the mark and done well locally as well as globally. And so they're encouraged to carry on doing more, whereas this wasn't possible before. We weren't making film and television for a global audience. It was going to film festivals, and they were doing some deals, but this kind of having hits in the USA coming out of Africa was kind of unheard of. This is the current reality, though. With all that said, only 1% estimated of the African continent subscribe to VOD services, okay? So this is an estimation. The data is very hard to really audit correctly, but roughly this is what it looks like. And this really comes down to just the high cost of internet and the number of people with disposable income and credit cards. It's still low. It's not like people don't want to stream. It's really just an economics question, and you can just see around the world that where there are more streaming subscribers, the economy is just bigger, and people have more disposable income. So it really just relates to that. But to give you an idea, South Africa is sitting at 18%, right? And it's a very, very big difference. And it's why you'll see a lot of the streamers are focusing on South Africa, and they're spending a lot of their budgets here, because they just have a bigger market. It's as simple as that. They match their expenditure and their investment to the market. So South Africa is sitting at 18%, and again, it's just more people with disposable income and access to internet. And this is a rough, again, breakdown of where Netflix's subscriber percentage is sitting. And you can see that South Africa dominates, and this is sub-Saharan Africa, by the way, dominates the landscape of sub-Saharan Africa in terms of subscriber numbers, and therefore attracts the most investment and commissions and productions. Okay, so this is whether you're now from South Africa, this is your selling point, or whether you're not from South Africa, this is a reason to come and produce in South Africa, but this is what makes South Africa also unique as a production destination, right? Obviously, we have a rebate, the DTIC rebate, which goes anywhere from 20% to 50%. 50% is an enormous amount in terms of what rebates around the world go for, but the 50% rebate is specific to South African black-owned productions, right? That's the 50%, that's the highest rebate you can get. Then there's a KwaZulu-Natal Film Commission rebate as well of 25%. Bonding is really only available in South Africa on the continent, and bonding is where it's called completion bonding. Somebody analyzes the budget and all the paperwork and guarantees the completion of the film, and it's insured so that if the director and the cast all died on an aeroplane, the insurance will pay out and they'll reshoot the movie. They will guarantee completion. And this is obviously important for investors, because what's the biggest risk for an investor? You just don't finish the film. It's all nice and good. The film's going to do this and it's going to do well there and it's got this actor in it, but what if you never finish the film? How does an investor feel comfortable? Completion bonding. And South Africa has got more than one bonder, in fact. ARI and Panavision, both gear houses are present in Johannesburg and Cape Town. This is a very important infrastructure support system, obviously, that you have in South Africa that you can shoot. And if a camera goes down on set, a new one will arrive on the same day. That's very much a South African thing that you don't get all over the continent. Right, and then we have what we call studio level A list crews. So that is the crews that can service a studio production, so very experienced, high-end crews in South Africa that you can service or produce a film with that will be able to deliver the quality required for a global sort of release. And then the obvious one, we have many varied locations, and you can shoot a lot of the rest of Africa in South Africa, by the way, and you can jump between. Somebody was telling me this morning how they shot a film here because it had the UK and another country in the script, and they could shoot it both in South Africa. So that happens a lot, where people can jump countries within South Africa based on the locations. And then South Africa has 10 official co-production treaties, including one with Germany, but many countries, sorry, that's from my last presentation in Germany, that's why it's there. But we have co-production treaties with many countries, and those can be used to officiate the co-production. And when it's official, it means that both in your country, here it qualifies in South Africa as a local film, and the country you're producing with, it qualifies as a local film. So you get the benefit of the local film financing in both countries. That's the main reason to use a treaty. Because the moment you don't have that, you're going to use one of the country's local funding system, and the other one will be the foreign funding system, right? So if you're using a treaty, it acts as both at the same time. And this is the pay TV landscape. It's sitting at around 6%, so it's larger than the streamers on the continent, and obviously was there ahead, but the landscape is changing because a lot of younger people coming to the market are moving to streamers. But for the meantime, we have about 6% penetration of pay TV. Free-to-air television, so just a quick one on this. Very few of the free-to-air broadcasters in Africa license local or independent content. The SABC is one of the exceptions, really, but a lot of the time free-to-air on the continent doesn't work like in Europe or in the States, where you can raise a lot of money. A lot of free-to-air actually in sub-Saharan Africa charge for the use of their slots. So a lot of Nigerian producers will go out and find funders, brands, who will pay for the production and the slot. So the broadcasters are actually selling their slots, not buying content. It's the other way around. So it's very difficult to get content funded through the broadcast, free-to-air broadcast market. It's easier, obviously, to sell after the fact to them once it's done in certain territories. There are even pirate channels that broadcast content without having paid for it or signed or anything. They just broadcast it because who's going to know? And there are almost no co-productions between the free-to-air broadcasters, which is obviously very different from, you might be hearing of people doing, co-productions overseas between the public broadcasters. That doesn't happen here a lot at all. So now to the market. Who buys African films? And what film genres are in demand? So, first of all, obviously, African buyers, in other words, from the continent, will buy, and that's not to be underestimated. That's the primary market, and that there is a huge demand for local content locally, but it really dies off very quickly as you leave the continent. So this is the primary, and that just goes for anywhere. Who buys the most Brazilian content? Brazilian broadcasters, Brazilian buyers. It goes for everywhere. Most markets, you'll find that they have either one of two setups. They either have American content first, local content second, everything else third, or they'll have local content first, American content second, everything else third. And that goes for anywhere. How many Irish movies did you watch in the cinema or on television, in the last 6 months? Or New Zealand films? You don't, because it's too far away, it's too foreign, it doesn't relate, etc. So the same thing happens everywhere. So you got to be cognizant that your main market is the local market, and you got to find the buyers and the financiers and the broadcasting outlets that want the local content, because that's your primary market. And then you can go out to the rest of the world. It's just almost impossible to make a film that will not resonate locally, but will somehow resonate outside of your local market. The second one is diaspora buyers. So there are buyers that service African audiences abroad. Now, there are specific ones like Africa Channel, but obviously Netflix and Amazon and the streamers also service those diaspora audiences. So all the Nigerian subscribers of Netflix that live abroad watch Nigerian content on Netflix, and they're aware of that, and they have the data. So they will buy and finance and co-produce with that kind of audience and market in mind when they do it. There's African American and urban content buyers like BET, Aspire, Bounce, Stars, and these are often interested in content from Africa, but only very specific content. It's got to be really commercial. So it depends on what their desire is at the time. And then there's diversity buyers. Diversity buyers means there are some buyers who just like content that is world cinema, that services an audience that is more discerning and doesn't like bubblegum sort of commercial content. But they're obviously niche in every country, right? South Africa, for example, used to have 10 cinema nouveaux, which were cinemas where you could go and watch Spanish movies or Italian movies or, whatever art house movies. I think there's 2 of them left, right? So it's also like, it depends on the market. Europe is usually the biggest number, let's say, of diversity audience and world cinema. So there's world cinema niche buyers like Sundance Channel. And then there's genre buyers for specific genres where the African element is really just a flavor, right? And this is something to understand and explore, because if you have a great action film, there are action audiences that love action. And the fact that it's set in Africa just makes it interesting. But they're not going out to look for an action film from their region, and they can only, action is action. If it's good action, like there was a film called The Raid. I don't know if you've ever heard of The Raid, but it was an Indonesian action film, and it blew up, and it sold in like 70 territories. It made a killing, and it was just because the action was good. But the whole film was Indonesian. There was no English in the film, all subtitled, but nobody cared because the action was good, right? So the genre can serve the audience despite any kind of cultural specificity. So what are the genres that are in demand? So like I said, action is probably the best exporting genre right now that the data has shown so far out of South Africa or Africa. Most of the times, action films that have been done here and have hit the platform have had 100 views outside of Africa for every view in Africa, which is a massive exponential, obviously, export, right? So that's the genre proven that you can almost not get it wrong, but action must be action. So the definition is kind of like every 7 minutes, something must blow up, somebody must get hit in the face, or whatever it is, but every 7 minutes you need action so that action audiences will perceive it as action. If you have a drama with 2 action scenes, then you're deceiving that audience, and they're actually going to be upset, right? And the buyers probably won't take it because it's not what it's built to be. Romantic comedy is working very well, the sort of Tyler Perry, Will Parker flavor of romantic comedy. All of them have been successful so far that have hit the platform and have found audiences both here and abroad. Thriller is also a genre that people love and look for. And drama has really recently also become a genre that works. But they're sort of looking for the heightened drama, soapy type drama in a film or in series at the moment, and that's also working worldwide. Faith-based and family is also a huge audience worldwide. People often forget how many families want to watch content and how little content there is for them to watch. And that doesn't mean make a kids movie. Make a movie that kids can watch, the parents can watch, and the grandparents can watch. That's obviously the biggest audience. It's 3 generations at the same time. Most people are going to make a film that's going to work for the one or the other. Well, nobody makes films for the grandparents, I guess, but most people are making films for adults or just films for kids. But if you can make a film for the whole family, obviously you triple your potential audience by doing that. And the buyers complain a lot that they can't find family content, and we really can't find any to offer them. And then comedy is a good genre and sells well, as you've seen by some of the shows that have been successful. However, it is quite regional specific if it is dialogue-based comedy. So if it's based on dialogue, then it becomes tricky, and it's specific usually to the region that you're in. If you translate the same comedy film into Japanese, I promise you it's not going to be as funny there. They're not going to understand half the jokes. Physical comedy is obviously then more universal and travels better if it doesn't require understanding of the dialogue and the specificities or the cultural specificities. Okay, concept versus execution. So you have a great idea, the story is amazing, it's incredible. Generally, we or distributors or sales agents are not going to look at the concept until we know the team in place can execute the concept. So what is the genre? What is the budget? Those are usually the first 2 things we're looking at. And who in the team has done something like this before or produced at this budget before? And if everybody is a first-time filmmaker and the budget's $20 million, we're not going to read the concept. Obviously not. You know what I mean? It takes time to read it, but it's obviously a futile exercise because how are you going to guarantee the execution of this concept? So what we always say, if the whole team is, you bring somebody on board who's done it before in some capacity, whether it's an executive producer or get a producer, we do look at the team before we look at the concept. Because there's no point, like I said, going through the concept and picking apart the story and talking about characters, etc., if it's clear that there's nobody here that's done something at the scale, and so what is the guarantee of execution? What's the plan? How are you financing this? How are you releasing this? How do you know that you can do this? What should we expect? This is important questions to answer before we look at story. And most people just think if the story is unique, it will get a life of its own. It will just take off because it's so great and it's such a good story. But it's just like somebody coming and showing you a plan for a house. that's amazing and it's beautiful and it's unique, but they've never built a house before. So are you going to give them 10 million rand to go and build the house? It's their first house. You know, what guarantees me it's going to work? And if it doesn't, how do I get my money back, kind of thing. So, you know, at the end of the day, film and television is a very expensive art form. You know, it's not just canvas and paint. You need to raise a lot of money to do it. And so that money comes with expectations, and people want to make sure that they get a product at the end that was promised. And, you know, we've seen it a lot. People obviously envision something, but even when they get into it, they realize they didn't have the experience to be able to deliver that vision, right? And they end up with something less, but they still have to try and sell it, and it's a very frustrating process. Okay, so as I said before, local impact is the most important, right? How is it going to resonate with your audience? However, bad content never travels, right? Doesn't matter how much marketing you do and who's in it, good content often travels, great content always travels. So at the end of the day, we can't project what your project's going to be, but if you looked at things that have worked, yes, great. If you make a great anything in any genre, it will travel, it will do well. The trick, like we said, is how do we know how it's going to be executed? And you want to give as much assurity up front of that as possible. These are the major festivals. If you got into a festival and it's not one of these, the value is quite limited. We obviously see people come with films and say it's been in 24 film festivals, and that's amazing. You can even win awards. There's entire companies that live off taking your film and charging you to give you an award. So seeing a lot of accolades and you know, sort of awards, it doesn't really help. We're looking for these are the festivals, you know, with credibility. If you're selected by one of them or you've won an award by one of them, then we can definitely sell your movie. You know, or if you've been selected, we want to go with you and your movie to that festival and sell it at that festival. But there are like 30,000 festivals, you know, and a lot of them, it's their business. Obviously, it's what they do, and we can't go to all those festivals. So these are the ones that really count. These are the markets, generally where most of the film and television deals are done. So the Cannes Film Festival has a market called Marché du Film. There's the European film market, the American film market, and some of these are sort of global, some of them are specific, like the Hong Kong film market is more focused on Asia. The Toronto Film Festival doesn't really have a market, but kind of does, so it's very subtle. They don't have stands, etc., but a lot of the buyers are at Toronto, but you have to sort of get to them on email and know how to find them. And then there's one in Argentina called Ventana Sur, which is run by the same people that do the Cannes Marché du Film, and it's a Spanish language market, for example. So that's like a specific one. And then in TV, you can see them up there. It's the usual suspect, and obviously MIP is the biggest one where we're at now. They have MIP TV, MIPCom, MIP Cancun, MIP China. You know, you can pretty much go to MIPCom and reach everyone in the TV world. If you're going to go to one market, then I would suggest going to that. If you're going to go to one film market, go to the Marché du Film. It's where the most buyers and distributors are. If you're going to go to one TV market, I would say go to MIPCom. That's where you'll get the most coverage. But if you want to do the circuit, you can go to all of them, really. Yeah. So I'm going to end on this quote, and then I'll take any questions if there are any. But Jonathan Wolf ran the American film market for a long time, and we used to meet up with him every end of market, and he used to say, and this goes especially for South Africans that are getting a lot of funding from government, in countries where producers are incentivized by government to create content, producers create content for the government. Okay? In countries where producers are incentivized for success in the market, producers create content for the market or the audience. Okay, this is one of the reasons why the USA is so successful, because they don't really get incentivized by government. They have to make films for the market and for the audience. So beware, if you're in a region and you come from a place where you can easily access funding, it can actually be your downfall. Because if nobody is checking what is the success going to be in the market, what is your incentive to make a film with market success? So try to always, when you're setting up a project, bring on board some sort of approval from the market, a pre-sale, or a deal with a reputable distributor or sales agent, something that shows that your project has a market, a foreseen market coming up front. If you fund your film entirely from grants and funds, etc., then you're most likely going to make a film for those funds. And they each have their own mandate, etc. But don't be surprised if there isn't a large audience at the end of the day, right? So Hollywood is not incentivized. There's no grants for Hollywood. And they dominate the global market. That's it. So if you want the presentation, you can go to slideshare.net/digital Ethiopia. And that's my email address if you want to contact me with projects or anything else. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
I'll stand up. Jack, sorry,
Yeah.
can hear me.
Yes.
My name's Rashad Mayweather. I'm a film producer from Los Angeles. I'm an actor and producer. I produced the film Summer with the Guys. It's out now in America. It's making thousands of dollars on Tubi and different platforms.
Yes.
But I want to bring it here. Our producer, the producer of all the American Pies, Warren Zide, he's our head producer. On IMDb, it has a 9.1 rating, and we have hundreds of reviews on Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb. How can I get the film here?
Right. So if you want to get it into here, when you say here, you mean Africa?
Yeah,
Or,
so I have a huge following in South Africa.
Yes.
My social media. So, because I'm here like 6 months a year, so I want it in South Africa. I want it in. Is this on? I don't think it's on. Oh, there you go. So I want it in South Africa because this is where I'm based and this is where I plan to produce more films at the beginning of next year, and I have a large following on social media here.
Gotcha.
But I want here, then the whole continent of Africa.
So the best bet is, like I said, with the regional distribution. You want a distributor in South Africa, from South Africa, that knows how to sell to the buyers here. So even if you go and talk to Netflix or to Amazon, they'll probably point you at who they're working with. So that's one way to find it out. But then you can come to us. You can email me. If we can't help you, we can put you